I was 19, pregnant, and standing outside my childhood home with a suitcase and nowhere to go. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had just thrown me out like I was nothing. My own mother had looked me in the eyes and told me. She told me I was no longer her daughter because my pregnancy would embarrass the family. What happened next broke something inside me that I'm still trying to heal years later. This isn't just a story about abandonment, it's about discovering that the family you trusted with your life can become your worst enemies when you need them most. It's about finding strength when everyone you loved turns their back on you, and learning that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the one you were born into. If you've ever felt completely alone in your darkest moment, if you've ever been betrayed by the people who should protect you, this story will speak to your soul. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to follow more real family stories. My name is Sarah, and for the first 18 years of my life, I believed I had the perfect family. My mother, Patricia, was a school principal in our small Massachusetts town, respected, admired, and seemingly loving. She ran our household with the same iron discipline she used at school, creating schedules for everything from homework time to family dinners. My father, Robert, worked construction and was the quiet type who let my mother make most of the decisions. He was tired when he came home, covered in dust and sweat, but he always had a gentle smile for us girls. My younger sister Emma was everything I wasn't: organized, obedient, academically gifted, and naturally beautiful. She was the daughter my parents bragged about to their friends, the one they showed off at church and community events. I was the wild card, the creative one who questioned everything and never quite fit the mold they had planned for me. While Emma excelled in math and science, I spent my time drawing, writing poetry, and dreaming about traveling the world. My bedroom walls were covered with my artwork and photos I'd torn from National Geographic magazines. I was constantly in trouble for daydreaming in class, for forgetting to clean my room, for asking why we had to follow certain rules that seemed arbitrary to me. My mother would sigh and say, "Sarah, why can't you be more like your sister?" Those words echoed through my childhood like a constant reminder that I was somehow defective, somehow not enough. Despite the constant comparisons and criticism, I loved my family deeply. I believed that their strictness came from love, that their disappointment in my choices was because they wanted the best for me. I kept trying harder to earn their approval, joining clubs they approved of, studying subjects that bored me, trying to squeeze myself into the box they had created. But no matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough. Emma would get praised for a B+ while I would get lectured for an A. She could stay out until midnight, but I had to be home by 10. The double standard was obvious, but when I complained, my mother would say, "Emma has earned our trust. You haven't." The tension reached its peak during my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to several colleges, but I chose the local community college because I couldn't afford anything else. And honestly, I wasn't sure what I wanted to study yet. My parents were mortified. "What will people think?" my mother asked. The principal's daughter going to community college instead of a real university? She made it sound like I had personally ruined her reputation. That's when I realized that their love for me was conditional, based on how well I reflected on them rather than who I was as a person. It was a painful realization, but I told myself things would get better once I moved out and could live my own life. When I turned 18, I moved into a tiny studio apartment across town and started working part-time at Maya's Cafe, a cozy little place near the college campus. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I was studying graphic design, which excited me in ways that traditional subjects never had. I loved learning about color theory, typography, and visual storytelling. My professors encouraged my creativity instead of trying to suppress it. I was finally in an environment where being different was valued rather than criticized. The freedom was intoxicating, and for several months, I was genuinely happy. That's when Daniel walked into my life. He was 22, with kind brown eyes and an easy smile that made me feel warm inside. He worked at Riverside Books, the independent bookstore downtown, and he shared my love for art, literature, and long philosophical conversations over coffee. He was gentle and patient, qualities I had never experienced in a romantic relationship before. He listened when I talked about my dreams of becoming a professional artist, and he never once made me feel like my aspirations were silly or unrealistic. With Daniel, I felt accepted for exactly who I was. My family's reaction to Daniel was predictably negative. My mother took one look at him, his vintage band t-shirts, his slightly messy hair, his beat-up Honda Civic, and immediately disapproved. "He's not good enough for you, Sarah," she said after meeting him for the first time. "You're going to college. You have potential. He's just a bookstore clerk with no ambition." My father was more subtle but equally dismissive, asking pointed questions about Daniel's career plans and making it clear he thought my boyfriend was beneath our family's standards. Emma just rolled her eyes whenever I mentioned him, as if my relationship was some embarrassing phase I would eventually outgrow. But Daniel and I were building something beautiful together. We spent hours talking about our dreams, our fears, our hopes for the future. He wanted to open his own bookstore someday, specializing in local authors and community events. I dreamed of starting my own design firm, creating visual identities for small businesses and nonprofits. We talked about traveling together, maybe moving to a bigger city where there would be more opportunities for both of us. For the first time in my life, I felt like someone truly understood me and supported my ambitions without trying to change me. The constant criticism from my family was wearing on me, though. Every Sunday dinner became a battlefield where they questioned my choices, my relationship, my future. They made it clear that they thought I was wasting my potential, that I was making mistakes I would regret for the rest of my life. "You're throwing away your education for a boy who will never amount to anything," my mother would say. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was criticizing my education when I was actually excelling in my classes for the first time in years. But nothing I did seemed to matter. I started visiting less frequently, which only made them more critical of my choices and more convinced that Daniel was a bad influence on me. The breaking point came on a cold November evening during my sophomore year. I had been feeling tired and nauseous for about a week, symptoms I initially attributed to stress from midterm exams. But when I missed my period, a terrifying possibility entered my mind. I bought a pregnancy test from the drugstore and took it in my tiny apartment bathroom with shaking hands. When I saw those two pink lines, my entire world shifted. I was pregnant, 19 years old, barely making ends meet, and pregnant with the child of a man my family despised. I sat on my bathroom floor for what felt like hours, staring at that pregnancy test and crying. The initial shock gave way to a complex mix of emotions: fear, confusion, but also something I didn't expect: a flutter of excitement. Despite everything, despite my age and our financial situation, there was a part of me that was happy about this baby. When Daniel came home from work and found me still sitting there, he immediately knew something was wrong. With tears streaming down my face, I showed him the test. His reaction wasn't what I had feared. He didn't run, didn't get angry, didn't blame me. Instead, he pulled me into his arms and held me while I cried. "We'll figure this out together," he whispered into my hair. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." We spent that entire night talking, weighing our options, discussing our fears and hopes. The practical side of me knew we were barely surviving financially as it was. I was working part-time at the cafe for barely above minimum wage, and Daniel's salary at the bookstore wasn't much better. We were already struggling to pay rent on my tiny studio apartment. But as we talked through the night, something became clear to both of us. We wanted this baby. We wanted to be parents, even though we were young and scared and completely unprepared. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and practical considerations. I made appointments with a doctor to confirm the pregnancy and start prenatal care. Daniel immediately started looking for additional work, picking up shifts wherever he could find them. We researched what assistance programs might be available to us, looked into health insurance options, and started making lists of everything we would need. It was overwhelming, but we were facing it together, and that gave me strength I didn't know I had. But I knew I couldn't put off telling my family forever. The thought of their reaction terrified me, But I held on to a small hope that maybe, just maybe, the news of their first grandchild might bring out a more compassionate side of them. I had always dreamed of the day I would become a mother and imagined my own mother being excited, supportive, maybe even helping me prepare for motherhood. I convinced myself that despite our recent tensions, family bonds would prevail when they learned about the baby. I decided to tell them at our regular Sunday dinner, thinking the familiar family setting might help soften the blow. I spent the entire week rehearsing what I would say, how I would present the news in the most positive light possible. I would emphasize that Daniel and I were committed to each other, that we had already started making plans, that we knew it would be challenging, but we were ready to face those challenges together. I even allowed myself to imagine my mother's face lighting up at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. Sunday came, and I sat around that familiar dining room table, my hands trembling slightly as we ate my mother's pot roast. Emma was there, telling us about her latest academic achievements, and my parents were beaming with pride as usual. I waited until we had finished eating, until the dishes were cleared and everyone was relaxed. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, "I have something important to share with you all. Daniel and we're having a baby. I'm pregnant." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. I watched their faces change from confusion to shock to something that looked like disgust. My mother's face went completely white, then flushed red with anger. My father's expression hardened into disappointment so severe it felt like a physical blow. Emma just stared at me with her mouth hanging open, clearly mortified to be related to me in that moment. The reaction was everything I had feared and worse than I had imagined. "How could you be so incredibly irresponsible?" my mother finally exploded, her voice echoing through the dining room. "You're 19 years old, Sarah. 19! You should be focusing on your education, building your future, not throwing it all away for some teenage mistake. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand the consequences of this decision?" Her words hit me like physical blows, each one designed to make me feel smaller, stupider, more ashamed. The word mistake particularly stung. She was calling my unborn child, her future grandchild, a mistake. My father nodded grimly, his construction worker's hands clenched into fists on the table. "We didn't raise you to be this careless, Sarah. We gave you everything: a good home, an education, opportunities your mother and I never had. And this is how you repay us, by getting knocked up by some loser who can't even afford a decent car." His voice was cold, calculated, designed to cut deep. "That boy has no prospects, no ambition, no future. And now you're tying yourself to him forever with a baby you can't afford to raise." Emma finally found her voice, and her words were perhaps the most painful of all because they came from my own sister. "Sarah, this is so embarrassing. Do you know what people at school are going to say when they find out the principal's daughter got pregnant? Mom has to face the entire community every day. How could you do this to our family?" She wasn't concerned about me or my well-being. She was worried about how my pregnancy would reflect on her social status, on her perfect reputation. I tried to defend myself, to explain that Daniel and I loved each other, that we had talked it through and made a conscious decision to keep the baby. I told them we were making plans, that we would figure out the financial aspects, that love would be enough to overcome the challenges. But my words fell on deaf ears. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that made me flinch. "Love?" she spat, pacing around the dining room like a caged animal. "Love doesn't pay rent, Sarah. Love doesn't buy diapers or formula or doctor visits. Love doesn't give your child a stable home or a good education. You're living in a fantasy world if you think you can raise a child on minimum wage and good intentions. This baby deserves better than what you can provide, and you know it. You need to seriously consider your options while you still have them." The implication was crystal clear. They wanted me to have an abortion. The family I had hoped would rally around me in this difficult time, The people I had expected to offer support and guidance were instead pressuring me to end my pregnancy. I felt completely alone in that room, surrounded by people who shared my DNA but felt like strangers. The unconditional love I had believed in my entire life was revealed to be entirely conditional on my compliance with their expectations, their standards, their version of who I should be. "I can't do that," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. "I won't do that. This is my baby, and I'm going to love it and raise it the best way I can." My mother's face contorted with fury, and for a moment, I thought she might actually strike me. Instead, she said something that cut deeper than any physical blow could have. "Then you're on your own," she said coldly. "If you're determined to ruin your life and embarrass this family, you'll do it without our support. You've made your choice, Sarah. Now live with the consequences. Don't expect us to bail you out when your fantasy world comes crashing down around you." With that, she walked out of the dining room, leaving me sitting there with my father and sister, both of whom looked at me like I was something distasteful they had found on the bottom of their shoes. I left that dinner feeling like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. Daniel was waiting for me at home, and when he saw my face, he immediately pulled me into his arms. I collapsed against him, sobbing uncontrollably as I told him everything my family had said. "We don't need them," he whispered fiercely. "We'll build our own family, Sarah. Our baby will be surrounded by people who actually love and support us." His words were meant to comfort me, but the pain of my family's rejection was overwhelming. I had never felt so alone in my entire life. The next few weeks were brutal. Morning sickness hit me hard, and I had to cut back my hours at the cafe significantly. Daniel picked up every extra shift he could find, but our financial situation went from tight to desperate almost overnight. We were already behind on rent, and now with my reduced income and the upcoming medical expenses, we were drowning. I kept hoping my mother would call, that she would have had time to process the news and maybe soften her stance. But the phone never rang. The silence from my family was deafening. Finally, swallowing what was left of my pride, I decided to try one more time. I called my mother and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, to talk things through. She agreed, though her voice was cold and formal. I spent hours getting ready for that meeting, rehearsing what I would say, how I could make her understand that I wasn't trying to hurt the family or embarrass her. I just wanted her support during one of the most challenging times of my life. When I arrived at the coffee shop, my mother was already there, looking tired and older than I remembered. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe she had missed me as much as I had missed her. But any hope I had was crushed within the first few minutes of our conversation. My mother looked at me across that small cafe table with eyes that had once held warmth and love, now cold and distant. "Sarah, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation," she began, her voice steady and controlled. "Your father and I have a reputation in this community that we've spent years building. I'm the principal of the elementary school, and people look up to me. They trust me with their children because they believe I have good judgment and strong moral values." She paused to sip her coffee, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "Having an unwed teenage daughter who got pregnant reflects poorly on our family and on me professionally. People are already starting to talk, Sarah. They're questioning how I can be trusted to guide their children when I clearly failed with my own. If you're determined to go through with this pregnancy, you need to understand that we cannot be associated with this decision. You've made your choice to prioritize this boy and this baby over your family's well-being and reputation." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My own mother was disowning me because my pregnancy might damage her precious reputation. Everything I had believed about family, about unconditional love, about the bonds that were supposed to tie us together through anything, crumbled in that moment. I realized that I had never really been loved for who I was. I had been loved for how well I could reflect their image of the perfect family. And now that I had failed to live up to that image, I was being discarded like a broken toy. I left that coffee shop with tears streaming down my face and a heart that felt completely shattered. But somewhere in that devastation, something else was growing, a fierce determination to prove them wrong. They thought I would fail, thought I couldn't handle being a mother, thought Daniel and I would crumble under the pressure. I was going to show them exactly what I was made of. My baby and I didn't need people who loved us conditionally. We deserved better, and I was going to make sure we got it. 2 weeks later, our worst fears became reality. Daniel lost his job at the bookstore when the owner decided to close down due to competition from online retailers. I had already had to quit my job at the cafe because the morning sickness was so severe I couldn't work effectively. We were now completely without income, 12 weeks pregnant, and facing eviction from our apartment. Desperation drove me to do something I swore I would never do again. I went back to my family home to ask for help. When my mother opened the front door and saw me standing there, obviously pregnant now and clearly distressed, I saw something flicker across her face for just a moment. I thought it might be concern, maybe even love, but it was quickly replaced by irritation and embarrassment. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" she asked, looking around nervously as if worried the neighbors might see me. I explained our situation, told her we just needed a small loan to get back on our feet, promised we would pay every penny back as soon as we could find work. She called my father and Emma into the living room, and I found myself once again facing the three people who were supposed to love me most in the world. My mother announced that I was there asking for money to support my situation, the way she said it making me feel dirty and ashamed. My father looked at me with such disgust that I actually stepped backward. "We told you there would be consequences to your choices, Sarah. We can't enable this irresponsible behavior by bailing you out every time your poor decisions catch up with you." Then my mother delivered the final, devastating blow. "Sarah, since you've chosen this path, you're no longer welcome in this house. You've embarrassed our family enough. We've decided that until you come to your senses and fix this situation, you are no longer our daughter. Don't contact us again." She actually walked to the front door and opened it, gesturing for me to leave. As I stood there, 19 years old, pregnant, and completely alone in the world, I realized that the family I had loved and trusted my entire life had just disowned me completely. That was 5 years ago, and as I sit here today in my own home, watching my beautiful 4-year-old daughter Emma, yes, I named her after my sister. Though she'll never know her aunt, I can honestly say that being rejected by my family was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because it didn't hurt, because it nearly destroyed me, but because it forced me to discover who I really was and what I was truly capable of achieving. Daniel and I struggled those first few years. There's no denying that. We lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. We ate a lot of pasta and rice, and there were nights when we weren't sure how we would pay the next month's rent. But we made it work through love, determination, and the support of the family we chose for ourselves. Daniel eventually opened his own bookstore, which has become a beloved community gathering place. My graphic design business is thriving, and I've been able to help dozens of small businesses and nonprofits tell their stories through visual branding. Most importantly, our daughter is growing up surrounded by people who love her unconditionally, not because of what she achieves or how well she reflects on us, but simply because she exists and she is ours. She will never doubt that she is wanted, valued, and cherished exactly as she is. My biological family made their choice 5 years ago, and I've made mine every day since then. They chose reputation over love, image over family, control over compassion. I chose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, and love over fear. Sometimes the family that raises you isn't the family that defines you. Sometimes you have to walk away from the people who gave you life to find the people who will help you live it fully. If this story moved you, leave your comment and subscribe for more emotional family stories.